Hello everyone, I'm Samar from Jugnoo. Jugnoo is basically a crowdsourced hailing app for auto rickshaws. So for those of you who don't know, auto rickshaws are these small little taxis which are very popular in India, which are probably the most popular public transport medium for most of the Indians. So there are about 5 million of those. And I'm here to talk about crowdsourcing in developing economies. So thanks a lot, Crowdsourcing Week, to invite me for this. And the idea is that crowdsourcing is actually very fast in developing economies. I mean, it's very, very fast. It's actually much faster to take root in developing economies compared to developed ones. So I just wanted to talk about why is that and what are some of the impacts that is having and what is going to happen because of that. So basically, why are developing economies different from developed economies? It's and how are those factors actually accelerating crowdsourcing in developing economies? So the major three factors are bad infrastructure. So everybody probably knows, for those who have been to India or China, I mean, roads are bad, smaller, like the public infrastructure is just not there. And second, there's high inequality of income compared to developed countries. There's much higher inequality of income, and the economy, partly in reason because of these two, and corruption and more different types of politics, it's much more inefficient when it comes to functioning of economy. So because of these reasons, it's actually being accelerated. So how basically the first factor which actually brought crowdsourcing, into mainstream is outsourcing, and outsourcing started because of location arbitrage. So the simple fact is that it's much more expensive to live in some parts of the world compared to others, and because of that, a lot of people figured out, what if people who are living in cheaper parts of the world would work for people living in the could work for people living in the more expensive parts of the world, and that's typical outsourcing. But as a corollary to that, what happened is people started realizing that even if you look at, say, a developed country, right, or an underdeveloped country, there's always a lot of location arbitrage in between these. So basically, people started to realize that they can be freelancers. So from outsourcing, this idea of freelancing, and from there, the idea of crowdsourcing kind of hold got very popular. So if you look at these some of these numbers, so most of the freelancers today are in developing countries like India, Philippines, Pakistan have so many freelancers, and the US is very high in numbers because of private contractors, but essentially people working on really on-demand platforms are mostly from developing countries because of this factor. And then the second factor was time arbitrage. So in fact, in my opinion, so a lot of people probably hate the surge pricing in Uber, right? I mean, 3x, 4x. I think everybody probably hates, but I think that's one of the most innovative ideas that crowdsourcing has brought into this world. And I mean, if you today think about airplane tickets, and if you thought that all the tickets would be costing the same, it sounds like a very stupid idea, right? Because it actually enables some of the people who can plan in advance to get better pricing for tickets. So it's a logical thing, right? I plan in advance, I'm more organized, I get better pricing for tickets, and people who are not, they pay a premium. So because of that, so now crowdsourcing is enabling that concept to be applied to almost everything. It sounds very outrageous in the beginning, but if you look at the big picture, that is the reason why the cost is actually going down on an average. So essentially, earlier there used to be a night surcharge for most of the taxi systems or even auto rickshaw systems in most of the parts of the world. People realized, but during night time, it's actually easier to drive taxis, less traffic, much faster to get around. So people realized, why not? It should be actually cheaper to drive taxis during night. So eventually people realized that the real way to find out the true pricing should be market driven, and that is what dynamic pricing does. So essentially, if you look at this slide, you can see the prices for these two different jobs are different, right? So a person can choose what he wants to do depending upon his opportunity cost. So that is basically a very powerful factor that has been possible because of crowdsourcing. So then another factor which has made it possible today to crowdsource is actually ambient computation. I mean, it's just a fancy word for higher penetration of smartphones. So essentially what a smartphone does is it gives a company or a person a context-aware information. So basically my smartphone knows, what am I doing, where I am, and what's the temperature, what's the, is it raining or not, do I need a taxi, when would I need a taxi. A lot of things can be inferenced very easily from this context awareness. And because of this, so right now, about 3 billion people can connect to the internet. So that's about 40% of the world's population. And it's growing so fast that in the next 1 year, probably, this will just explode. This is, so India today is the biggest smartphone market in the world. And China and India are almost together, but they're very, very fast adopting the smartphones. So because of that, almost everybody can come into this crowdsourcing world and start offering services. So because of earlier, it was much more painful. I mean, you'd have to go to a laptop or a computer to search for a room in Airbnb. For Airbnb, it still works because you typically are, doing it in advance, like planning in advance. But think about taxis, think about errands, think about delivery. You just can't plan it in advance. It has to be real time. And the only way it can be real time is if you have a smartphone in the hand. And these are the three factors that have led to the huge growth, a huge surge in the crowdsourcing in developing countries, especially. So now I come to the impacts. What is happening because of crowdsourcing? And I'll give you some examples according to that. So first is environmental effects. So I don't really know any example where there have been adverse effects because of crowdsourcing. And just to give you one example, so what's happening now is there's a transition from produce more and consume more to produce less and consume more. So how does that happen? So that happens by increasing the efficiency of any production. So in fact, yesterday somebody asked, what if efficiency increases and so won't it reduce the GDP? So the good thing is, yes, it would actually, but it will be a good thing because right now we measure development in terms of production. Gross domestic product is the full form of GDP, which is not the right approach. And what we would eventually start doing is we would start measuring development in terms of consumption, right? I mean, I don't know how that like a GDC can be devised. That's, I guess you guys are better at that. But eventually, development is what people are consuming, not what people are producing. So if you increase the production, the efficiency of consumption of same production, that is what crowdsourcing is helping. To give you an example, Zipcar is a car sharing platform in US, and every Zipcar replaces about 15 cars on an average, and it has reduced so much in emissions, just imagine, not even, so just imagine if there are 15 times less cars on the roads for every zip car. I mean, the kind of space it is saving, the kind of carbon dioxide emissions it's saving. So it's just immense. And similarly, with almost every crowdsourced company like Airbnb, Uber, their economic impact has been massive. So this is one of the most powerful impacts. And the second very powerful impact is increased personal freedom. So when we were young, we used to read that when a country develops, right? So one of the most important factors that happens is that actually you start to have more personal freedom, right? And if you go to India, you'd have much lower choice. If you go to like a very poor country in Africa, you'll have much lower choice, like what you can eat, what you can do. So, and that's actually a measure of development. How much choice do you have in what you want to do, what you want to work, etc. And crowdsourcing increases that choice inherently without actually, in traditional sense, developing the country. So in a way, if you change the way you view development, crowdsourcing is actually increasing that choice, and because of that, developing, every economy. So just to give you an example, I know of these people. So this is a real example of a friend who lives in San Francisco. So he drives passengers only on Friday and Saturday nights because that's when it's the most profitable. And then he does deliveries during off hours when it is most profitable. And then he codes for some time. So essentially, he works for about 20 hours and makes a very decent living, just because he's able to choose what he wants to do, and he's pretty happy because he doesn't have to work that much. He can choose almost in real time what he does, and even then he's super prosperous in the normal economic sense. And that's one example of increased personal freedom. And then so this is an example from my company Jugnoo. So basically, this crowdsourcing concept increases the economic efficiency. So just to give you an example of auto rickshaws, the ones I showed in the first slide. So on an average, so we did, before we launched the company, we did a survey. So they are free for about 70% of the time. So essentially, an auto rickshaw driver, and I'm pretty sure taxis in cities are not very different, is actually standing idle for 70% of the time. And on an average, their one work day is about 10 hours. So about 7 hours every day, they're just waiting for passengers. That is just ridiculous. And if you count that amount, so there are 5 million auto rickshaws in the country, 7 hours for every person. So it comes out to be $26 billion. And this is without spending a single dollar on any infrastructure. So a lot of people complain about lack of infrastructure in the country, in developing countries, especially in India. And so you really don't need to produce any infrastructure. All you need to do is just increase the efficiency of these people, and this wealth that is created can be divided between those auto rickshaw drivers, the passengers who are using them, and the company, hopefully. So the idea is that this is one example of how these crowdsourcing companies are increasing the economic efficiency of the existing infrastructure. So same with a lot of other companies. So Airbnb is a classic example. I mean, there's no free time there because the resource was not being used at all. And then some of the challenges. So this is a very important slide because a lot of times I've seen people saying that crowdsourcing actually is very good for economy. I mean, I'm also saying that right now, but there's a social impact which is not so positive, that it increases the concentration of wealth. So because almost every crowdsourcing platform becomes a monopoly if it is successful, or a duopoly or something, so it has a lot of power. And it can abuse that power very, very easily. So because of that, you have to be very careful. So careful about how to not have this happen. And ironically, one very logical conclusion people take from this is that the government should actually regulate the companies, which is actually exactly opposite of what should happen. So just to give you an example of Uber versus Jump. So Jump was a Belgian company, started doing similar stuff that Uber was doing, and they got out of business because of the regulation. And Uber will never get out of business because they can pay the fines. They can pay a $20 or $10,000, 10,000 euro fine to the authorities, even if they go out of, even if their cars are impounded. So because of that, a company that could have been successful and not have let Uber make a monopoly is actually out of business because of regulation. So essentially, the governments just need to step out and let things play out and essentially regulate as they understand more, because it's almost impossible to regulate something that nobody really understands in the whole world. Even Uber did not realize the extent of change they're going to bring when they started. And second is privacy and security threats. So this is very real because a lot of delivery platforms, all those things are actually having a lot of security issues. I mean, your privacy can be compromised. So here the companies have to be very, very careful and very responsible, and the government should also kick in and make sure that this is being followed pretty tightly. So this is one thing that nobody really understands today. So being cautious makes sense. You should be cautious here. But at the same time, regulation should not create monopolies which, they are trying to avoid. And finally, just a little bit about Jugnoo. So Jugnoo is an auto rickshaw aggregator. So auto rickshaws are the small tuk-tuks, three-wheelers, small taxis. And just like Uber, press a button, an auto rickshaw comes. And so we started about a year ago, a little less than a year ago, and we are doing about 10,000 rides a day. So India, in that context, does about 30 million rides on auto rickshaws every day. So the market is so huge that we have a huge impact that we can bring to the market, and that's why we thought it's a very logical problem statement to follow. And so this is a little bit about traction. So a little over a 11-month-old startup, and we have about 800,000 users, about 800,000 total transactions, doing about 10,000 daily transactions, and doubling almost every month at this point. So we are in all these 20 cities, and so it's a very simple layer that sits over a piece of infrastructure and becomes, it's very easy to scale, and the impact is also very massive. So as a final thought, I would just like to say that these things are here to stay. I mean, there's no way to really say that you would not, if you shouldn't do this because people are probably going to lose their jobs or something. Maybe yes, but I think much more jobs are going to be created eventually because of these platforms also. People are getting much more choice. And I think the government should actually be more liberal in trying to understand and work with the companies which are disrupting this, rather than trying to be more afraid of the scenario. So that's pretty much it.